Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast Q&A during a pandemic section of Saturday. All right, that was not coherent.
No, but I think actually, given when we started and why we started, so far every single one of our live streams has been during a pandemic.
Yes.
If we are to...
We should, in
light
of that,
the common understanding of what a pandemic is.
In light of that, I think we should rebrand them. Still alive streams.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's.
Okay, so we've got a bunch of great questions. We're going to start with many that have nothing to do with, sorry, I just lost my place, that have nothing to do with COVID, and then we're going to drop the YouTube stream and we're going to address some of the COVID questions. But you just riff for a moment because I just lost a question I was trying to find. Riff.
You ever get that not so coherent feeling? When I get, I don't know what to say. Riffing.
Okay, fair enough.
Right, okay.
We did it. But no, you weren't.
Okay.
Okay, so I did not share this with you, but I saw that. What did you say?
We can admit that it did not work.
Yeah.
We attempt to just simply start riffing.
Fair enough. I've already forgotten about it.
Me as well.
This came as a surprise to me, a disappointing surprise, and I have not shared it with you yet. But I will read it here, and then I will show what I have done, and we'll see if you have a suggestion for something else.
All right.
Loved 1491, the Charles Mann book, but unfortunately, Mann dismissed your book based on the Guardian review. Called you Evo-Devo guys who don't consider archaeological evidence a variety of ancestral social environments, which is, quote, inimical to the idea of a single rigid human nature. And then this person writing in gives the Twitter, the URL where this came from and says, thoughts?
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, for Christ's sake. So I went, you can show now, Zach, to the terrific Charles Mann tweeting this awful, dishonest Guardian review saying, memorably tough review of new Bret, Weinstein, Heather Heying book on how society today doesn't reflect human nature as it evolved. Quote, little of it appears to be based on actual research. The science, as the kids say, is just a vibe, end quote. So I, having just seen this, just responded to Mann's tweet saying, we love your work and recommend 1491 as further reading in our book. Indeed, it's one of the very first books that we recommend as further reading in here. I continue to him, you have taken a dishonest critique seriously. If you read our book, I'm certain that you will find much on offer there. We destroy the idea of a, quote, single rigid human nature, end quote, among other things. So, what else? It's just that's so disappointing, right?
Yeah.
And of course, a big paper will publish a garbage review, and some people will only read the review because that is in part the point, right?
Right, but I think the thing is, in Mann's case,
yeah,
right, what he has done, the reason that we recommend 1491, and the reason that it was transformative of our thinking, is that he challenges the conventional wisdom with respect to the peopling of the New World in remarkable form. And so I fully expect, as you suggest, that if he engages the material, he will come out somewhere very different. And I am looking forward to that because there is a new synthesis to be arrived at. What happened in the New World is the greatest story never told.
There are many actually practicing paleoanthropologists and archaeologists, but more paleoanthropologists who have been doing this work for a while. But he is really the guy who helped bring it into a conversation that more people were having.
Right.
Beginning, I can't remember if it was Atlantic or Harper's that the first time I ran into his work was in that. I think it was an excerpted piece from the book called 1491, which is an article that I was teaching with for many years, and then we both started assigning the actual book in our programs.
I think the point is what I find lacking, and it's not like it's absent from his book, but what we haven't done, the reason that the New World is so important, is that the New World, because all of the behavioral evolution that took place in the New World is happening in isolation from everything that happened in the Old World, that it is actually the only place where we have an ability to understand how humans evolve. That we have looked too much to the Old World, that has biased us too much in the direction of morphological evolution. Right. And the story that we really need to understand is the story of our cognitive evolution. Mm-hmm. And because that takes place, because the story of the peopling of the New World takes place late, right, after the morphological evolution is effectively all done, right, and it starts at a moment when the Beringians, as they walked into the New World, walked in with Stone Age technology. They would have had control of fire. They would have had, flint-knapped tools, but they would not have had written language, mathematics, agriculture, any of those things.
The concept of zero.
The concept of zero, and those things all were invented in the New World, invented or discovered in the New World in total independence.
Convergently with the discovery or invention in the Old World, sometimes many times.
Right. It allows us to see how human beings actually function. It's the only place where we're going to get the story right. And
this point that you made, which I don't think we explicitly make in the book, why do we start with and then to some degree end with, like, bracket the book by talking about the peopling of the New World, is precisely as you say that thank you, Zach, that the morphological change, by and large, that reflects who we are as humans, was long since over. We are not experiencing vast anatomical and physiological change at the point that, call it 10 to 30,000 years ago, right? Given the evidence we presented last week, it looks more and more like between 20 and 30, maybe even earlier than that. Humans already looked human. So what is it that has happened to change dramatically the impact that we have had on the planet and the number of ecosystems we've expanded into? How is it that we have become the ultimate niche switchers? It's about cognitive evolution. It's about mental and psychological and emotional and intellectual evolution, which is no less evolutionary, but it doesn't fossilize.
No, it doesn't fossilize. It is, the genome has offloaded the work of evolutionary change to the software layer for a good reason, which is very visible in the New World. I want to take back one thing I just said, though.
Okay.
I said it's the only place that you can get this story right.
Yeah.
There's actually one other place that you can get this story.
Oh, I was going to say, you can get it right every place, but you have to look more carefully.
Well, the problem is you don't have the isolation except in the New World, which is necessary to see the story clearly.
Okay, I'm going to see. No, before you say, I'm going to see. Yeah, I'm not going to answer for you, but I'm going to see if I can guess what you're talking about. I have two possible answers in my head.
All right, it's one of them.
It probably is. No, I'm not going to tell you. Yeah.
It's Australia.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, the story is not as diverse as I understand it. There aren't as many cultures that arise from the introduction, but there's a great deal more richness, culturally speaking, than the crude story that we are told about Aboriginals.
Right.
So it is similar in that way.
It is similar in that way. I guess so. That was what I thought you were talking about. My other possible answer is actually two, and maybe more, depending on how you count, which is thinking about things like the Hobbits of Flores and Dmanisi, not the Hobbits of Dmanisi, but these different, more recently than we would have thought 20 years ago, hominins, I believe, that show actually some very different anatomical and physiological stuff. So, maybe that actually makes the opposite point in some ways.
Yeah, I think it's a very different story.
we have very little. We don't have as much archaeological evidence from them because they're just tiny populations.
Right, tiny populations. Yeah. We have a few fossils, and one has to infer much. But I do think that they tell a very important story. I think it's a different story.
Yeah.
Right. The story, the morphological evolution in those cases is the story. The story in the Aboriginal population in Australia and the Native American population in the New World is the story of human cognitive evolution and basically adaptive radiation.
So why not Europe then? So I guess it seems to me like the New World and Australia, because there is one place of entry-ish, right? So it makes for a cleaner story. There's less recursion from other populations. You don't have a sort of a constant stream of people out of Africa into Australia, into the New World, the way that you would into Europe and into Central and Near Asia.
Well, I think
it's just sort of the cleanness of.
Yeah, but the cleanness has an importance that is not going to be obvious. The importance is that because the evolution we're talking about is software layer, it's contagious, right? And so an individual with an idea dropping in from somewhere doesn't leave a mark, but the idea suddenly shows up. The isolation of the New World population and the Aboriginal population in Australia tells us that didn't happen. Now, it will have happened between populations, but the point is you don't have to worry about where the idea came from. It was organically developed in both cases. And so I guess what I would say is adaptive cognitive radiation is the key to understanding humans, niche switching, and our massive diversity. Right? That's the process that we don't yet understand. And even the fact that we don't even understand the basics of it to the extent that we can't specify, as a field, we can't specify the relationship between that cognitive evolution and the underlying genetic evolution. Right? We've punted on that question for various reasons, some of them political, right? And some of them just based on a confusion about whether this is indeed a new primeval soup or not. Right. But the point is, you want to understand how humans work and why we're so successful. The New World tells that story in the most glorious way possible. It didn't have to be true. It could have been that there were many introductions to the New World, and it turns out there are really two, right? Or at least that have the modern implication.
2 or 3.
Yeah, but
less than 10.
I think the point is you have a major introduction, you have an Arctic second introduction, and the clock starts at a moment when the morphological stuff is largely finished and the major inventions haven't yet been discovered, or at least some of them. And so anyway, you can see the whole thing unfold here.
Good. Okay. I kept monarchs for the first time this summer and witnessed the eclosion of over 50. One pattern I observed is that they all formed the chrysalis and eclosed in the first couple hours of morning. Do you have any thoughts on the selection process and what happened to the ancient monarchs that emerged at night or later in the day? So I know very little about the monarch life cycle, and I wouldn't have known without this question that ancient monarchs were typically emerging at night or later in the day, nor because of the ambiguity in the way it's phrased, is it clear to me that there was, in fact, a pattern, right? So to answer this question, the question seems to hinge on there was one pattern and now it's different in captivity. And I'm not certain enough that that is the case to want to wade in particularly. But of course it is true that monarchs in captivity are not going to behave the same way as they will in the wild. And we, in fact, give one example of this in the book, although I can't remember exactly. It's in service of sort of a reduction of explaining that a reductionist understanding of what it is that we need to do to, for instance, keep animals alive will often limit what they can do in life.
So is the implication of the question that monarchs taken into captivity lose this pattern the way poison dart frogs lose their toxicity, or is the implication that captive monarchs have evolved a change?
I think it could be either. I don't think the person asking the question, David here, is specifying what. So I would say it's not clear to me that there is a different. Yeah, the cat just put his paw in my water, so that water has been sullied. Do I want more? Sure. Yeah. I would like to know for sure that there is a pattern in the wild that is different from the pattern. So what we know for sure is that David here is reporting that he saw a pattern of eclosion in the first couple hours of the morning. Interesting observation for sure. What I don't know, which is presumably known, is there a pattern in the wild of a different but relatively narrow time of eclosion that the monarchs typically engage in? If there is, then you are asking which of the two hypotheses, or we would then want to distinguish between two hypotheses, which is that monarchs in captivity have changed, much as dart poison frogs take them into captivity and they lose their toxicity because, as it turns out, they're building the the lipophilic alkaloids that is the poisons that they make from building blocks in their native diet of ants and mites, and there's nothing that you give them in captivity that will provide those building blocks. So they, over time, they already have their color, their aposematic coloration, but they lose their toxicity. And this is true for both the dark poison frogs in the New World and the mantella that I studied in Madagascar. Right, that was one. And then the second possibility was
that a captive population has evolved a change.
Right.
Now, I'm guessing it almost has to be the former.
I would think, especially since, he's saying, I kept monarchs for the first time this summer. You would,
He must have captured them.
No, I presume that there's a captive. I doubt that anyone is. Hopefully, no one is collecting monarchs from the wild at this point.
Well, but somebody captured them, but
right.
They can't be very many generations down the road, so that would be very rapid evolutionary change. So I'm going to guess that it's got to be the loss of the pattern, which is almost certainly going to be the result of some confusing signal in captivity. Mm-hmm. Like it could be, the temperature. That there's an optimal temperature, which does not suggest a strict temporal pattern in the wild. It would suggest a empirical measurement that would cause
temperature. The obvious one it could be is just photoperiod, and actually making sure that you're mimicking the photoperiod of when they would be doing, engaging in this in the wild, and really not breaching that by turning on the lights at random moments.
Yep.
All right. What are your thoughts on tongue tie and its effect on lactation and speech? Now, I meant to look up. I have to remind myself every time I hear this term, which I've heard before, what tongue tie is. Do you know offhand?
No, I'm not sure I've ever heard the term.
Tongue tie, just very quick. Ankylosing from the Mayo Clinic is a condition present at birth that restricts the tongue's range of motion. So in which the, what is that? Whatever it is, the medial membrane that connects the tongue is basically thicker or tighter. Apparently it's called the lingual frenulum. Is shorter, thicker, or tighter than it ought to be and tethers the bottom of the tongue's tip to the floor of the mouth. So this is something that is, I suspect, a modern thing that very few babies pre-modernity had, although I don't know that for sure. And so the question is, what are your thoughts on tongue tie and its effect on lactation and speech? Really, all I can say is what I just said, which is I suspect that this is something happening in development as a result of something about what modernity is doing to fetuses in utero. Mm-hmm. But what will its effect be on lactation and speech? It seems to me that, lactation maybe not so much because the tongue, actually I'm not sure. I can't, I'm trying to envision where the tongue is supposed to be as a baby is attached. Suckling, and I can't quite do it. So,
I think it's going to reduce the efficiency of it. The movement of the tongue is part of the suckling thing, and basically, it can't help.
It can't
so
help.
It's going to disrupt from something like a minor level to a major level. But I would expect. It sounds kind of serious, frankly. Yeah.
No, and I think I'm not going to just continue to read what other people have said about it, but I think it is often surgically treated, and then relatively a short-lived problem if done so. So sorry, we can't say much more about that. I was stung by 20 bees. I had never known myself to be allergic. A week later, I've developed hives. It's apparently rare. Any idea what variables may be in play? Also, do you have any good hives remedies?
Wait, stung by 20 bees.
Had not known himself to be allergic. A week later, he developed hives.
Well, okay. So I was throwing the word hives in the context of bees caused my brain to throw a massive error, but I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay. Thankfully, it did not cause me to collapse or in other ways need any sort of assistance. But here's the thing. The immune system is an amazing, dynamic, beautiful system replete with many vulnerabilities. And as I've talked about before, the major trick that the immune system does is distinguish self from everything else, right? And the problem is that non-self recognition, when it works, is the key to not being afflicted with pathogens all the time. But it can go wrong in one of several different ways. You can either start attacking self, and this can potentially be induced by a pathogen that is being favored to look more like self, because that causes it to avoid immune surveillance, to lead the immune system in the direction of reacting to self in a way it wouldn't have before. You can have the failure of the immune system to see something. HIV, for example, essentially dug a hole in the non-self recognition system that it then inhabited, right? It basically went after the cells that reacted to it, leaving an absence of cells that reacted to it, which gave it free reign. You can have the potential triggering of the immune system against stuff that isn't you, but is part of how you interact with the world, like your food. So there's lots of stuff. And the bee thing is that the bees introduce a toxin to you, which is somehow in a zone where overreaction, basically allergy, is a very likely phenomenon. But the key, and I think the answer to your question, which actually has a lot to do with why your first dose of vaccine gets a different reaction than your second dose of vaccine, as we've seen, is that your first dose alters the immune system. Same thing with a bee sting, right? The bee introduces this foreign molecule. The immune system has its reaction to it, and then it may remember that reaction. Memory is part of how the system works, right? That's why you don't get the same pathogen twice, is that it remembers. So the fact of having been stung by many bees, having a bunch of foreign protein dumped into your system, then causes your system to say, oh my God, there's a problem with that protein. It's indicative of something. And, your immune system isn't a thinking entity, so it can't calm itself down necessarily. It may assume that those proteins were the result of some pathogen, right? The bee is not a pathogen, but the immune system doesn't necessarily know that. And so...
Yeah, I don't hear in your answer, though, an explanation for why such a delay would occur absent an additional exposure to the toxin, in this case, the bee sting.
It's not in my answer, but my guess is it's in the complexity of all of this, because what you have, as we were talking about in the main podcast, these systems have to have simple rules in order to work, right? You're a being of 30 trillion cells, but you don't have a huge library of rules. It has to be, you've got 200 cell types or something like that. And so what happens is, you get the introduction of something foreign. The body takes a guess at what that is. It ratchets up a set of responses, like histamine responses, that cause inflammation. They cause the flooding in of immune cells, etc. Then, things unfold over time as garbage collection happens. Macrophages collect bits of stuff. Any cells that seem to be infected, which would not be the case in the bee sting instance, but in the case of a pathogen, it would be. All this stuff happens. And so the point is, there's a trajectory that takes a bunch of time. My guess would be that what happened is the initial response to the bees was such and such, and as that response ebbed, it revealed something else, right? So something like that, be my guess.
Hives remedies.
Right.
I don't have any.
Well, hives are an inflammatory response. I would super caution you about antihistamines, which have very potent effects, many of which are bad. Benadryl turns out to be connected to dementia in a cumulative way, very bad stuff. So anyway, you can intervene, but your interventions will have consequences that you can't necessarily foresee. There are natural anti-inflammatories like turmeric, which are liable to be much safer.
If it's of all of the sort of pharmaceutical interventions, I would say in general, in this case, topical is a possibility. So topical versus systemic is likely to be somewhat safer, and something like a topical corticosteroid, while not certainly 100% safe, is likely to have lower risk than, say, topical Benadryl or anything systemic.
Yeah.
Now this I read because it invokes Pink Floyd, which, as you know, I am a huge fan of, and know the lyrics to many of their songs. And it provides a lyric that not only don't I know, I don't even recognize.
All right.
So I know. Well,
I'm ready.
I often reflect on the line in the song Pink Floyd Echoes Part 1. So it's an early album. Quote, "And no one forces down our eyes," end quote, "as others look up." So I feel a little bit like I'm playing Name That Tune here. Like there's not quite enough words to quite place it. Plus it's an early album, which, you know, I at least have, most people have less familiarity with than the later albums.
This is a Syd Barrett album?
I think so, if memory serves, yeah. Yeah, I think the few, there's like 3 maybe, early ones with Syd Barrett, and then we know the later ones once he turned into an orange or whatever happened to him. So I'm sorry, that wasn't nice.
He did not actually turn into an
he did
orange.
not know. I think in his case, is that what he thought had happened to him? That was someone's uncle. Do you know what to make of this?
No,
Yeah,
I think I actually don't know the song.
Yeah, I don't know the song either.
And yeah.
Okay. And then this one too. What riff did you wish to share on the podcast but never found the right moment?
Wow, I don't remember exactly what that's a reference
to.
to.
And actually, until I read that out loud, I assumed that this was in reference to something very particular that we had said. And now I think maybe it's just like a sort of a general, is there something you've wanted to talk about but never found the right moment? In which case, this is your moment.
This is the moment.
This is the moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wish I
had
prepared better for that question.
Sorry, baby. Try again. Try again later. All right. Boy, okay, we have 7 more questions, and then we will drop the YouTube stream. And
I have to warn you, it looks like Odyssey may be partially crashing. So
okay,
I'm working on figuring it out.
Okay.
I can't guarantee what you're thinking about.
Okay. Well, in which case, I think we're not going to go COVID. Probably, if we're on YouTube, because
YouTube is not a place for adults.
That's right. Which is a perfect segue for the next question. Is there an evolutionary reason for popping pimples and picking scabs?
Great question.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally.
Yeah. Why pimples don't pop themselves, I don't exactly know.
But I mean, they do. They do,
Yeah.
but not always, and not in time.
One has
right?
the sense that for a skilled pimple popper who knows when to do this, it is an enhancement over what happens naturally. And what I would say is what one finds inside a poppable pimple.
Oh, wow. That's where we're going. Okay.
What
Let's
one finds in there are presumably surface pathogens encrusted in white blood cells. That's what pus is. And so the idea is your immune system has correctly found some bacteria in some pocket in your skin, and it has encrusted it. And then you are getting rid of that pathogen by expelling it into the world, which is good.
Right.
So
so you want to get rid of that. What you don't want to do is get rid of that with, fingernails that themselves may have similar surface pathogens on them. You need to be very, very clean.
Right. You don't want to give yourself an infection, and you don't want to drive it inward.
Right.
The whole thing works if you expel it into the world. And right. So
and then with regard to scabs, this one of the things that I think of here, this is the answer to this question has to be gross. So I guess let's just go there.
Yeah, that's not on us.
That's not on us. It's on Blankety Blank Slate who wrote this question. Just good.
Touche.
Yeah. So Blankety Blank Slate is who to blame here for discussion here. I'm reminded, and I actually haven't heard this from a veterinarian in modern times, but when I was little and my cat would get herself into fights because she was a badass who got herself into fights, and she would get just torn up and get these like deep lacerations that would scab over. The veterinarian would say, take the scab off, let it ooze, because otherwise you're likely to get an infection that's deep. And if you keep on letting it expel what is in there, it's much more likely to not need further work from any of us, being the sort of the veterinary professionals at that point in the 70s and 80s. And it did work. Right.
Yep.
And in general, this is likely to be at least part of the answer.
So let's put it this way. I think scabs are very often picked badly, picked in error, but that the
too
instinct,
early.
Yes,
Yeah.
too early is right. But that in some sense, think about the classic scraped knee.
Yeah.
Right. Classic scraped knee is going to involve a lot of stuff, not stuff embedded in the skin, in the wound, right? And you can pick out the big stuff, which will be...
You're not picking scabs at that point, so that's
No, I'm going to get
clean.
there.
Okay.
I'm going to get there. The point is, you first skin your knee, right? You get all kinds of little gravelly stuff in there, and you will be driven to take out the stuff that you can find with your fingers, right? The little rocks and things. But there's lots of stuff below the scale that you could access it. And in some sense, I do think wound healing is, as far as I know, I've gone looking for evidence of what we understand. It feels to me like we know very little about this process, and that basically it works and we know how to augment it and protect it, but we don't know a lot about the magic underneath. Maybe, hopefully somebody will point us to some large compendium of information. But the point is, one of the things that is true is as you are healing, things are moving in various directions, right? Cells are forming, things are being pushed. And my guess is that layer of, that matrix of stuff that makes up the scab contains stuff that has been pushed to the surface, right? And so that a process in which you pull a scab at the right moment is actually removing things that need to be or may need to be removed.
Helping the conveyor belt of healing happen. So, I guess I would just add that there's a very valuable and perhaps necessary for complete healing part of what you do at the point that you've, say, gotten road rash, that is necessary that you didn't mention, which is sort of, use your fingers, use the tools on you to get the macro stuff out, but then flush it. If you've got running water, either from a faucet or a stream, as long as it's clean, so as to get some amount, a larger amount of the microscopic stuff that you have no chance of dealing with your fingers. And, and it depending on where you are and what you have access to and what it is that you destroyed yourself on, flushing it with hydrogen peroxide or alcohol. It can also be useful depending on how deep it is, etc.
Yeah.
But the flushing of it will mean that as the scab is setting, there is going to be less. It's less likely that there will be a lot of things that need continue to be evacuated from the wound.
Yeah. Although in both the case of the zit and the scab, part of the point is that actually your body has a way of dealing with this stuff if you don't get it out. And it's not so elegant, right? So it can wall off.
It's really not elegant.
It can wall off stuff that can just permanently live in your tissue, or it can dismantle it molecule by molecule, right? Those aren't nearly so good as, hey, that's a macroscopic thing. Let's just get rid of it.
Yeah.
I would also just point out, though, that we do something which I think in many ways is positive, but that interrupts this whole wound healing scab formation
thing.
Humans. We moderns.
Okay.
The daily shower thing.
Yeah.
Right? So that has an interface with this that's most unnatural. And so I guess the question I would have is...
and specifically the daily shower with soap. Soap, which, takes away all of the bacterial stuff on your skin, most of which is beneficial.
Right. That's true. But also even just the warm water breaks apart the stuff. So the point is just as in our book, we talk about hey, if your bone is aligned, you might not need a cast question. There's some ancient way that scabs work that presumably does not result in every hunter-gatherer picking scabs too early, but them knowing exactly when they should actually be pulled off.
Without daily showers, also the scab is likely to become hardened sooner and perhaps then be have a few iterations more than if you're regularly softening it with your shower. It's a different kind of a beast.
Right. That's the thing. I don't think we have a good sense of how that changes things because it's pretty rare that you're in a situation where you don't have a shower available.
Yeah. What are the ethical ramifications of colonizing other planets when there's a possibility of that planet producing intelligent life?
Now, this depends a little bit on what they mean by colonizing. Does that mean sending people named Colin, or?
It's spelled differently. It would be sending people named Colin.
Right. Of which there's...
Yeah, but that's spelled differently too. It's just pronounced the same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Yes.
Now we're deep in it.
Colin, what is the ethical...
I mean, at one level, this is exactly one of the themes of the science fiction book that I wrote that is not yet out in the world. But I think that there is a really important distinction to be made, at least so far as I'm concerned, with life, a planet that might already have or be well on its way towards having intelligent life, and a planet that could conceivably, or on which some very basic unicellular forms have even been discovered. That I think that our responsibilities are different in those two cases, and where you draw the line is going to be up. That's going to be the sort of the astroethicists' domain, right? Not that that's a thing yet, but I think figuring out what that line is, as opposed to saying any planet could produce life, therefore we should never go there, to me strikes me as an arbitrary line that is way too much in one direction.
Yeah, it's way too cautious. A planet that has no life on it, even if it has the potential for life,
because it's in the Goldilocks zone, whatever.
Right.
It's totally locked.
Yeah, I mean, there's even an argument to be made for altering the conditions to enhance, sort of 2001 style.
Yeah.
But as far as planets that have life, I think the primary, if you found unicellular or its equivalent level of complexity life on some planet, the primary obligation is not to screw it up, right? Even if present technology can only get you so much of an understanding of what you're seeing, future technology might get you farther. So not disrupting it so that whatever other example of life we have is still available to be understood would be a huge ethical obligation. On the other hand,
well, then maybe I think that you are coming out with a much more conservative approach then, because I think colonizing another planet, not that we're of course nowhere close to this technologically on any of the domains that we would need to be, but actually getting people to live and thrive and reproduce and create culture on a different planet would surely disrupt whatever unicellular life was already there.
Yes, I also think it's people just need to calibrate their expectations here. It's hard enough to get a arbitrarily large biosphere to function down here on Earth, and in terms of meaningfully colonizing in an ongoing form some other planet that doesn't have pre-existing life that would be useful, and even if it did have life, it would be almost certain to be useless to us in most regards. Welcome to not nearly complex enough systems.
All right. Yes. Excellent. Okay. P.S. This is a second part of a question, maybe, but it says, I pre-ordered Hunter Gatherer's Guide in June with Amazon EU, but they just canceled.
Canceled?
So sad.
Canceled.
Yep, that's what it says. Nothing to see here. Okay.
What does that even look like, canceled, if the book is still being published? That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. Try. I mean, so I've now hit. Yeah, we answered that question, so I don't see who it is. But try again. And if you have a screenshot that you would send to darkHorseModerator@gmail.com, that would be useful. Because we're trying to collect, we've got stories from all over of people having pre-ordered in June and now saying they're not going to get the book until November. It's the first time I'd heard just canceled, but for fuck's sake. Are artificial rock and climbing walls good? The times I've climbed natural faces without safety equipment seem more true and memorable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And absolutely to the second part of your question, I would say I've just bouldered some. I've never rock climbed with equipment or anything. But I guess, if you've got very young kids and you're in a place with one of these artificial climbing structures, I maybe it's a failure of imagination, but I have not been able to perceive the harm, right? Unless, so long as you remind the child at the point that they're able to internalize this, there's likely to be, as much as the designer of that thing may have tried to avoid this, there's likely to be some regularity in the thing that you're climbing that you won't find in natural rock, and also some regularity in natural rock that you won't find there. That they're, climbing real stuff that changed over time due to the forces out there in the universe will be fundamentally different, and you will be able to apply those lessons from natural face to natural face to natural face in a way that you may not be able to climb sort of the monkey brain lessons from an artificial rock to a real rock.
I think this is true and at a very extraordinary level. And I would argue it's actually an interesting analog. It's a funny analog for what you and I say about.
So are you talking now?
What?
Sorry, I was just trying to get him to change the camera.
Oh, got it. All right. That was weird. Okay.
Well, you were talking and yet I was seeing my face.
Right.
Sorry, I'm trying to get on.
The thing that you and I say about the importance to education of engaging physical systems.
Yeah.
Artificial climbing walls are physical systems.
Yeah.
But they lack a lot of the advantage of a rock system. Now, the rock system is a lot more likely to kill you.
Right.
It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
It really takes a lot of understanding. So I did do a bunch of rock climbing, and the first 2 weeks of the course I took involved us sitting in a classroom reading from a book that catalogs all of the accidents from every year and describes what happened. And
this is like you having to pass the written test to get your driver's permit before you're actually allowed behind the wheel.
Yeah, except the written test for the driving thing is not all that useful in terms of being a good driver. The going through story after story of people who got maimed or died.
This was useful.
So useful.
So, and I suspect now that you tell me that this is what primed you to become an addict of what could go wrong.
In some ways, it is the same. But imagine that it's like a dry government document about the accidents, right? And it starts with like a list of contributing factors, and it's like, alcohol, no hard hat,
sleeplessness,
bees.
Oh God!
Right. Okay. And so it's like, okay,
really,
yeah.
that's the three that you remember near the top of the list.
They were all different, but you could kind of see the thing unfold. The person, in one of them kicks a rock that hits the person belaying them from below on the head and then falls. Right. So anyway, it is the what could go wrong rock climbing edition. But anyway, the point is, yes, rock climbing is actually dangerous because you cannot control, for example, am I about to climb into some bees, and will I, keep my wits about me as I escape the bees that I can't get away from nearly fast enough? Right. So anyway, there's that. But the point is the climbing wall has the same problem as the person at the front of the room telling you, yeah, you got it, or you don't get it yet. Right. Which is, it's a person. And so you're sort of looking through their narrowed eyes. And if the person at the front of the room is very, very good, then that will be somewhat useful. But it's not the same as engaging a world of real phenomena that interact in ways that will inform you of things. And
that's right.
So, for example, if you face one of these climbing walls, you can be pretty damn sure there's a way up it.
A climbing wall, yes,
right.
As opposed to a rock face.
A rock face, right?
There's
now
no guarantee.
Right.
There's no guarantee there's a way up.
You may know on the rock face because it may be in a book and somebody says, oh, there's a route over here and there's a route over there. But
if you come across a rock face in a place that you've never been and you don't know if anyone else has, although what are the chances of that these days? There is no guarantee.
Yeah, there's no guarantee.
The world was not put here for your pleasure, right? But
Right.
that rock wall was.
Right. And so I think the thing is,
but the climbing wall, rather.
I'm
Yes.
about to get in trouble
Okay.
with lots of very fit people, but the rock, the artificial rock wall may very well be good for practicing certain things. I'm sure it is, and it's great for strengthening certain things, but it's junk rock climbing.
Mm.
It's, like junk sex and junk food.
It's still a hell of a lot better than just watching videos of people doing it.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So I have a little story that I'm reminded of, not about, not exactly on topic, but about bees and climbing. Like I said, I never rock climbed, but as you know, I learned to climb trees in the tropics with this guy Joe Mayer. I think Mayer is how it's pronounced. He's dead now, but he was in Panama when I was leading study abroad trips there. He was associated with the Institute for Tropical Ecology and Conservation, which is the field station that I based my study abroad trips there at. And on one or two, maybe both, but maybe just the one. So he taught me he had been a print journalist, and then he had retired. In his 60s, he became both a spelunker and a climber, and then came to know tropical rainforests and used his climbing skills to get up into trees. And there was he and another guy had built a platform near the top of, I think it was a ceiba tree, about 110 feet up, I think, if memory serves. Maybe conflating that with the one at Tipitini, but and he had harnesses and ropes and everything, and he taught me, and then when I brought my students down, he taught us to go up. And I have some pictures of a few of my students and I up on this platform, and it's just really extraordinary to get a view of the tropical rainforest from high, as opposed to at ground level. But a story about him is that at some different moment with some different students, he was climbing, and not a tree with a platform, but they were up at some point, and the two students who were not very experienced climbers were coming down and came down through some bees, and they were Africanized, which means they didn't give up. And so one of them started to get stung, and Joe, basically, this guy who at this point was in his 70s, incredibly fit, but a guy in his 70s, managed to prioritize getting these students out of the tree and safe, but he got just ravaged, so that by the time he got to the ground, he had dozens, if not hundreds, of bees on him. Managed to get scrape them off, get into the waiting vehicle, whatever, and rush to the hospital, and spent quite a few days recovering. And amazing that a 70-year-old, but a very fit 70-year-old, was able to survive that kind of an attack by Africanized bees. But what he had done was he'd saved the people in his care. He'd saved the students in his care.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Those bees are incredibly frightening.
Yeah.
I've had an encounter or two. I've always gotten away from them, but
Terrifying.
gotten away from them on the ground.
Yeah, you hear them? Oh boy.
Yeah, it's really frightening.
Yeah. Okay. Apparently I already clicked. We already did that question because I don't see it here. Why do some people not get fat? Why wouldn't every human be programmed to overeat in the presence of abundance? I think those are two separate questions. And so the first question, why do some people not get fat? The premise is some people could not even get fat, provided the right conditions. And I think I don't agree with that premise, if it is in fact what the question hinges on. The second question is, why wouldn't every human be programmed to overeat in the presence of abundance? And this also, the premise-ish here is that what causes obesity is simply how much you take in, as opposed to there's a metabolic disorder that is being facilitated by our modern diets, such that it is possible that you can eat as much as you want if you're eating a diet that doesn't have the shelf stabilizers and all of the fillers and everything that you find in the middle of the grocery store, and you might still not get fat. And this there is growing clinical and research evidence for this more refined understanding of what makes people fat, as opposed to calories taken in and calories expended through movement.
Yep. One answer is that they're trying to make the rest of us feel bad. Another, yeah, that's not a very good answer, but
That's an answer.
I think the thing that I want to point people's attention to is the informational question, right? So what is the right number of calories to store on your body? That depends on what kind of environment you live in, right? So one fact about abundance is that if things are truly abundant, if your system gets this idea that food is available whenever you need it, then carrying it around with you isn't a smart thing to do, right? And so there's a sort of lineage level calculation where you shouldn't want to consume calories that would be usefully spent on somebody else if you don't have any limit of calories in the future, right? If food is always going to be abundant, then actually
just dial down your desire for it.
Right, because then every step is cheaper because you're not carrying it around with you, right?
True.
So the things that cause the metabolic syndromes are likely to be information that suggests that storing a lot of extra fat on you is a good idea, right? So anyway, information is the hidden feature here, and undoubtedly, in my opinion, information early in your life, information that may come in ways that have nothing to do with how you've behaved, right? So hormonal information that comes in from the cows that we tried to fatten up in order to get more for them at market, right? That information, because you're a mammal and the cow is a mammal and the hormones are, cross-reactive, may inform your system in ways that you had no control over. It may be that, things like dieting send a famine signal and cause your body to record the hazard in a particular way. It could be, there's one little puzzle that I've always thought was kind of interesting, which is, how does your body know how many calories you've eaten, right? In other words, the process has to involve something like you are measuring with your mouth the taste of something, which gives you some sense of the admixture of what's in it. And then there has to be some sort of a feedback after you've eaten it that gives you an ability to calibrate how much that was worth.
So is what you're asking in the short term, like how does it know when to send the satiation signals?
Right.
Is that okay? So not at first it was like long term. It's like, well, I don't know what's in those black boxes, but there's stuff going on in the gut that is assessing nutritional value.
But my point is, I'm predicting that there will be an interaction between these things, that the somatic experience of eating, in order to do your ancestors the most good, would have to have been connected to a feedback that says, okay, this had that many units of, this kind of joy and that kind of joy. Oh, and that netted to this many calories and, this much protein. And so anyway, you would get a feedback that would tell you the value of what you had encountered and therefore what to crave properly. And basically we have a chaotic system where we have way too many foods, so we can't, we don't get a chance to sort of assess the value of something that we have eaten because it tends to come in some chaotic sequence with a bunch of other things. And anyway, so my guess is we are wildly miscalibrated because
I see. So there may be like an onboard measurer that is helping assess when to stop eating, when to keep eating, et cetera, that is going to basically have an impossible time with the diversity of food that we have in modern times. And not just take out of the equation all of the garbage that we're eating, all of the non-food molecules that most moderns end up eating, but just the fact that you might have Turkish food one night and Spanish food the next, and hamburgers the next, and spaghetti, and to the degree that there's some sensor trying to assess how much value was in that. It's like, I give up. It's too diverse. It's too much. Yeah.
Yep. And I would also point out that in a natural circumstance, this would be connected to the term in ecology is optimal foraging,
right?
But that basically figuring out how best to spend your time in the pursuit of food involves a lot of detailed information, right? So some food may be very rich in nutritious value, but so expensive to collect, either because it's distributed in tiny little bundles, or the bundles it's distributed in are really good at running away from you.
Or they're guarded by bees.
Right. It may come with hazards. And so the idea is, let's say that there's a patch of mungongo nuts and they're, 5 kilometers away.
Which, for those of you who have not read either Nisa or the other amazing book about the Kong, the name of which I always forget, but mungongo nuts are actually one of the preferred foods of the Kong.
Yes, in fact, I've forgotten which person in the book is asked why they don't farm, and the answer was something like, why would you farm if there's so many mongongo nuts in the world? But anyway, if there's a patch of mongongo nuts 5 kilometers away and it is liable to yield, 6 ripe fruits, per visit, and the question is, well, how does that investment of time and that reward rank compared to going and looking for kudu, right?
Right.
Yep. So anyway, there's an awful lot of place for information to improve your foraging behavior, and we are making it all so noisy that we suck at it, and it makes us fat.
Indeed. Yes. Okay. Well, we're still having Odyssey problems, Zach. Oh, okay. Well, we've already been at it an hour, haven't we? Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to keep up with the non-COVID questions, and then at some point we'll switch and maybe just do a couple COVID ones. The National School Boards Association has called on feds, the FBI, Homeland Security, etc., to act in a coordinated manner against CRT objectors. It's unsettling. I think actually someone emailed me about this morning. Maybe it's this person. Just ran into this. You've heard about this? I just barely know anything about it, and I think I have to look into it more. And I think we may talk about this I guess not next week, but next episode.
In the meantime, let me just say there is a kind of bloodletting that happens where one settles upon witches and then one hunts them. And there is something going on in our system where we are having an ongoing discussion about who the worst witches are and in what ways we might properly punish them.
Yes.
And you just got to step back and look at this and say, really? We're going to do this to each other again, right? Did we learn nothing from history? That's what's going on. And so, CRT objectors is a pretty good measure of willingness to confront bad thinking. And if you're involved in selling bad thinking or wielding bad thinking, you might want to find those people and get rid of them, which is exactly what happened to us at Evergreen. And exactly, the point was, well, of course, it was the evolutionary biologists who were teaching about race and sex and all of that in a useful way. Of course they had to go because it was really inconvenient for the garbage narrative that was necessary for the takeover.
Yeah. Yeah, we were critical theory hesitant, weren't we?
You better believe it.
What are the evolutionary advantages behind learning a new language? Love the book.
I would say being able to communicate with people who speak that language is oh man, it's so good. I so wish I was good at this.
Right. I don't actually remember. Drew Schneidler, our research assistant and friend and former student, research assistant for the book, said at some point, and I think we may have left it in as a footnote in the book. I can't remember. Said, there's such a push right now to get kids to be bilingual young, because we know that there's this critical period during which picking up a second language is much, much easier. Once you have a second, it's much easier to pick up a third, a fourth, a fifth, etc. And certainly it's one of the ways that I have long considered our parenting suboptimal, is that we did not, we tried-ish, but neither of us ourselves having fluency in a second language. Neither of our children are bilingual. I certainly assumed before we had children that at the point that we had children, we would do everything we could to make that happen. And it didn't happen. And Drew said, what about the trade-offs? Like, no, we never hear about the trade-offs. It's just promoted as obviously this is a good thing. And it seems like it's a good thing. It makes the world more accessible. It makes us all able to reach across more boundaries that seem unbreachable if we can communicate with people with whom we don't share one language, but we do share a second. But might it not might that generalism make you maybe somehow a little bit less deep in your home language, in your native language? It's possible.
Yeah, I don't discount the possibility that there are downsides. My guess is we're so far from the efficient frontier that the downsides don't manifest. It's so much upside.
Yeah.
That it's well worth it, even though a very efficient system would reveal that, of course, it does have costs. It can't not.
Yeah.
But yeah, what the advantages I would say it's an extension of the advantage of travel itself, right? People who have never been anywhere else are in a much worse position to know what the world is.
Yeah.
Right.
And for what they are, and what their home culture is,
exactly.
And everything about themselves.
You have to find those things out through interaction. And of course, those of us who have figured them out at least are in some position to know that we're limited because of all the cultures we haven't seen, but we can at least extrapolate to what might be there. The thing about language is the better you are at a language, the better positioned you are to look through the eyes of somebody who speaks that language natively. And the more people whose eyes you can look through, the better you understand what the human experience is. But if all the eyes you look through well are people with whom you share a native language, then of course you can get a pretty good sense of, what English speakers are. But it has a not only a limit but a bias.
Yeah,
you're biased in the direction of things that people who speak that language, which of course many of them will have shared history of one kind or another. So it is profoundly limiting. But I think it's basically an empathy limit.
Yeah, good. Jason asks, why am I bald with bad teeth when my brother is perfect? Thanks. I feel like Jason probably did something to deserve this, right?
I actually blame the brother.
Oh, okay.
Not quite sure why, but I think somehow.
Yeah, perfection is always suspect.
So suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, the simple answer, to the extent that there's any truth at all in your story,
right,
and that you are indeed full siblings, has to do with the edit on the genome that each of you got.
Yeah, and you're right. So, I mean, in both senses, right? Like the particular, you could be anything from an exact genetic copy of your brother, even if you're not twins, to actually sharing 0% by common descent, depending on what half of your mother's genome you got and what half of your father's genome you got. It's much more, on average, you're 50% related by common descent, but also the edit at the epigenetic level from through development.
Right. Well, I mean, I meant the edit that you were describing, the genetic edit.
Yeah. Which it just usually isn't. Edit usually isn't the word that's used there, which is why I thought it was worth spelling out.
No, I mean, well, okay. There are two things in play. One is the full siblings are 50% related on average, but it can be anywhere from 0 to 100.
Right.
But to the extent that it is actually very likely to be near 50%, what 50% is
right.
potentially radically altering in terms of how similar you seem. Now,
Exactly.
my guess about this brother, knowing very little about him, is that he's completely insufferable.
No doubt.
And you wouldn't want that. So in some sense, I think you
take
got
the
the better
baldness.
end of Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay. Could you speak about the evolution of binary thinking, when it's useful and when it goes astray? Thanks so much.
I think you need more categories there.
There are binaries in the world. Sex is one of them. And then there are a lot of things that are not binary, but it's easier because categories are useful and many categories are real, and even many real categories have fuzzy borders, and it's hard to both keep in our heads category but fuzzy borders. Therefore, category real, oh boy, what happens at this interface between them? Reasonable people might disagree about which category it belongs in.
Yeah, and I would say there's a larger principle here. which I used to say to students, which was, there are lots of things that contain a very important truth, but you need to be very careful not to overly fall in love with that truth because it will obscure some other truth. So like, ant hives are an organism, right? An ant nest is both very much organism-like. You have to see that in order to understand what it is, but it's not completely true either. And so because you have to be able to hold both things and not, I guess the point is, categorical thinking is occasionally exactly what you need, and more often than not, it is more confusing than it is helpful, and being able to facultatively be categorical is the way to go.
Yeah. Okay. Zach, you want to drop the YouTube stream, and
Okay. Well, maybe.
Okay. Well, there's actually one question here that just came in that we will answer as the last question. Sorry, we're not going to address the COVID questions on YouTube because
It's not a place for adults. That's why.
It's not a place for adults. So we're going to answer this one more question here today, and then we will see you all in 2 weeks. What do you think? And I think we actually already addressed this at one point, but let's do it again.
Actually, we should just clarify that so the people who have filed these questions don't think that we are ignoring them. The problem has to do with the Odyssey stream not being reliable, so we can't just go there. We would answer them.
Yeah. And in fact, I'll go through after we're off and forward to our next stream those questions here that I think we really are going to try to get to next time on Odyssey only, because it's clear that that we can't have those conversations on YouTube.
Yep.
Okay. So, final question for today. What do you think about people voluntarily submitting their DNA to services such as 23andMe or Ancestry? Both of these companies are now either publicly traded through ME or BlackRock. There was a recent Veritasium video. So I don't know about that last part. And really, publicly traded or not, you and I have been concerned about these for a long time. And, as they were becoming popular, we were encouraged to submit our DNA to them and did not.
Yeah, I think, A, they're not as useful as you think, and B, the hazards are many and hard to even fully define.
Yeah, we can't know what all might be done. Collecting all those data and using them in a disaggregated form so that no individual ID was possible is one thing. But I am not aware of any assurances that that is the limit of the use to which those data might be given. I can't even figure out what the right verb is there. Put. Thank you. Put. And I guess maybe let's just say a word or two about the first part of your answer, which is it's actually not clear how useful they are. That this is one of these things that promises big because it feels like, well, it's your genes, it's your genetics, and we know, we've got the human genome. Everyone remembers the Human Genome Project from the late 90s, early aughts. Like we've got it, and it doesn't mean as much as we think it does. And there are lots of things that will hide about our ancestry in places where we don't even know to look yet. And so, obviously there are things that are revealed by these services, but it's really not clear what either the accuracy or the precision are on them.
Yeah, even if they are accurate and precise, it's not clear what it means. That's the problem, is that, the nature of genetic identity is that it is quickly atomized into a population, and therefore reading meaning into ancestry, it's an interesting curiosity. If I could do it in complete safety, I might as well, although pretty sure I know the answer.
I think we've
from
talked
others.
about this before. Like I think in your case, it's
Not very interesting.
You're not much of a mutt.
No.
All right, I'd kind of like to know.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, that's it. Well, I guess that's it. We can. The Odyssey stream is not working.
Back up if you wanted to try, although I'm not sure if that's a good idea, given that it's failed multiple times.
I think we will.
Given that it's failed multiple times, I think it's a mistake.
We'll stop here for today, and we'll hope for 2 weeks from now we will be able to do that, and we'll devote some time. We'll plan to devote some time, not just as an afterthought, in the Q&A to just answering questions on Odyssey for adults.
All right.
So, thank you for being with us. Consider finding A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. Available some places that books are sold, but it's supposed to be available everywhere that books are sold. The audiobook is available, but really the hardcover. So the audiobook we're pleased with, and we read it, and people are really enjoying it, but it doesn't have the references, and it doesn't have the recommended for the reading, and it doesn't have the glossary, and there's at least one more thing that it doesn't have. So it's not the complete, but it could give the sense of there's a lot of claims that are not actually really fully referenced in the book. And if you're the kind of person as I am, who when they read something interesting often wants to follow that and make sure that it is what the authors claimed, etc., the hard copy allows you to do that in a way that the audiobook does not. So if you want it, keep looking.
Well,
be persistent.
There's keep looking. There's also, they don't charge you until they send it.
Yeah, order it on Amazon, and
we know that books are in the pipeline,
Yep.
so presumably if you order it, it will come at some point,
Yeah.
and probably sooner than they say, based on how many books we know are headed in the direction of the...
And we have actually heard a few anecdotal stories to this effect, that they were told, people who had pre-ordered in June were now told they weren't going to get it until November, and then received a copy this last week. So place an order if that's what you want to do, and you may well get it before you're being told you will. In other news, your Patreon conversation is happening tomorrow. We are going to have some new merchandise after many, many months without any. Some Welcome to Complex Systems shirts coming soon. So the store where you can get those things is at store.darkhorsepodcast.org. If you want to read about seahorses, go to naturalselections.substack.com and other things. And find us on YouTube and on Odyssey, and be good to the ones you love, and eat good food, and get outside.
Be well, everyone.